when I drove for Scott Bloomquist last year, I got to test with him one time. People kind of had told me how he tests, but how he tested, I think, was probably the smartest way of testing I've ever been around. Scott, basically, I got in the car and we'd make an adjustment. I'd pull out on the racetrack, run down in turn 1 and 2, wide open through 3 and 4, and then I'd run through 1 and 2 fast again, and then shut her down the back. So I make a lap and a half. And if you ain't got it figured out what that car feels like in a lap and a half, you're probably not going to figure it out. So he's like, a lap and a half, and that's all you got. And then pull back in. They'll make another adjustment. It'll go back out. So that way you're not lapping motors out. You're not killing tires. Your tires don't get too hot or anything like that. But that was, to me, that was a wild way to test. But I feel like it was, you learned the most and you were able to get the most runs in and try the most things in one period of time for a test session.
Let's talk about that just for a minute, Scott Bloomquist. Now, my disclaimer is he's weird, he's different, blah, blah, blah. But, and I've said this before, Einstein, all the greatest are different. Rumley. Yeah. Is Bloomquist, does he fall in that category as a brilliant, weird man? Yeah,
he definitely, the way he thinks about anything in life is way different than anybody I've ever been around. I think a lot of people have seen that through his podcast and everything he's done. But at the end of the day, he's a super nice guy. And he's, people kind of look at him as like hard to approach and that type of stuff. But he's very nice guy to talk to anybody. He's great with my kids and stuff. Like, he's just a really good guy. He did a lot for me. So that was, to travel up and down the road with him for basically 6 months was something that probably very few have ever done. But to drive his race car, it was, big accomplishment for me to even have that honor to do it. But yeah, I mean, it just very smart guy, thinks about things way different than we do. And I think that's what made him so successful for a long time, is like, when you're thinking about the little things, there's so far in depth that he would go into the smallest things, whether it's how springs travel and the hysteresis in springs, to we were pulling rear ends out almost every other week to check the straightness of rear ends and mess with that. I mean, there was just so many little minor details that he just crossed that nobody else, I don't even think thinks about.
You went to school. And sometimes it's not even about tricks of the trade. It's about the way you work. Pulling rear ends out, that would be something somebody at a local racetrack might do once a year, maybe never take their rear end out. So his work ethic is pretty hardcore.
Yeah, and, there's no shortage of work, but like, it's always late at night. I think everybody kind of knows that how Scott, works is like, we'll get, home from a race or whatever, and it doesn't mean nothing for him to work till 4 or 5 in the morning. So, and he just sits there and sips on his Crown Royal and just works, So, yeah, it's pretty impressive. He's just very smart with tires, grooving tires, siping tires. He had ways to sipe tires and groove tires per racetrack. And I mean, he has a wall at his shop that is just full of, tires that he won races on. So he could, and he's got them labeled like, this was a Batesville tire, this was a Tri-City tire. He can pull it down and look at how it wore and be like, okay, this is how I'm going to groove my stuff for when I go back to Batesville or wherever. So just kind of crazy. He had ways that like, he would teach me like how I need to hold the grinder for different places we were going, like just crazy stuff, like.
I'm afraid I might have messed up a lot of my tires. I feel like it was funny though. I have ergonomics the way I use my grinder.
So he would round edges at some places he goes, and he makes sure the edges are sharp. It's just pretty wild. He's just so in depth on everything.